elderly man abandoned at the airport by his daughter. 5 years later, the daughter returns to the same airport and is paralyzed by a shocking discovery. Chicago O'Hare was packed that autumn afternoon. Amid the rush of the crowd, 75-year-old Harold Ross stood out. Dressed in his best suit, holding a bouquet of flowers, he eagerly watched the arrival gates. Though his eyes were tired, they sparkled with hope. Harold checked his watch for the 10th time. His daughter Sarah's flight was delayed. It had been 5 years since he last saw her, ever since she moved to Los Angeles to pursue a promising career. But now, she was finally coming back to take him with her. They were going to live together in California. As he waited, Harold thought about the sacrifices he had made for Sarah. He sold the family home to pay for her elite college education. He worked 2 jobs to ensure she had every opportunity. He had put his own dreams, like traveling the world, on hold to dedicate his life to his daughter. "It'll all be worth it," Harold smiled. "I'll finally get to meet my grandson and spend my last years with my family." The loudspeaker announced the arrival of Sarah's flight. Harold straightened his tie and moved closer to the exit. His heart pounded with excitement. After a few minutes, he saw her. Sarah looked different. Her long brown hair was now short and dyed blonde. She wore a stylish suit and high heels, dragging a designer suitcase behind her as she spoke into her phone, looking annoyed. "Sarah," Harold called out, waving enthusiastically. She saw him and hesitated for a moment. She hung up the phone and walked over. Her face didn't show the joy Harold had hoped for. "Hi, Dad," she said coldly. Harold, not noticing her tone, hugged her tightly. "Sweetheart, I've missed you so much. How was the flight? And little Tommy, how is he?" Sarah pulled away from the embrace, looking uncomfortable. "Dad, we need to talk." Harold's smile faltered. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Sarah glanced around, avoiding her father's eyes. I can't take you to Los Angeles." Harold felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "But we agreed." "Things have changed," Sarah interrupted. "I got a promotion. I'm moving to New York next week. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Dad. I can't pass it up." "But what about me?" Harold's voice trembled. Sarah sighed, impatient. "Look, Dad, you'll have to figure something out. Maybe you can go to a nursing home or something. I'll help with the money, but I can't take you with me. You understand, right?" Harold didn't understand. He looked down at the flowers in his hand, feeling foolish. "But Sarah, I sold the house. I have nowhere to go. I'm sorry, Dad. I have another flight to catch in an hour. I've got to go." Sarah grabbed her suitcase. "I'll call you when I get to New York, okay?" Before Harold could respond, Sarah was already walking away. He watched her leave, frozen in place. People brushed past him, some bumping into his shoulders, but Harold barely noticed. Slowly, the reality sank in. He was alone. No home, no family, nowhere to go. The flowers in his hand seemed to wilt, just like his hopes. Harold stumbled to a nearby bench and sat down. Silent tears rolled down his wrinkled face. He looked around, seeing families reuniting, friends embracing. The contrast to his own situation was too painful to bear. With trembling hands, Harold pulled out the rosary he always carried in his pocket. He clutched it tightly, and right there in the middle of the crowded terminal, began to pray. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know what to do. Please help me." People walked by, some glancing curiously at the old man crying alone. But Harold didn't care. In that moment, his prayer was all he had left. Night had fallen over Chicago's airport. Harold, still dazed by Sarah's abandonment, realized he had nowhere to go. He looked around, watching the crowd thin out. Cleaning staff began their shifts, and a few travelers were dozing off in uncomfortable chairs. Harold stood up from the bench, his legs aching after sitting for hours. He grabbed his small suitcase and walked through the terminal, searching for a place to spend the night. He found a quieter corner and sat on the floor using his suitcase as a pillow. Sleep didn't come easily. The cold air conditioning and the constant noise kept him awake. When he finally drifted off, a security guard woke him. "Sir, you can't sleep here," the man said. Without much sympathy, Harold got up, confused and embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't have anywhere to go." The guard sighed. "Try a shelter. You can't stay here." As the day broke, Harold left the airport. He walked along the nearby streets looking for shelters. The first one he found already had a line forming outside. "Sorry, sir," the staff member said. "We're full. Try again early tomorrow." Harold tried 2 more shelters without success. Tired and hungry, he returned to the airport. It was the only place he knew in the city. In the terminal bathroom, Harold washed up as best he could. He looked at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the weary man staring back at him. As he wandered around the airport, Harold noticed a young cleaning woman watching him curiously. When their eyes met, she smiled gently. "Are you all right?" she asked, walking over. Harold hesitated, but something in her expression encouraged him. "Honestly, no. I've got nowhere to go." The cleaner, whose badge read Amira, frowned. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can I get you some coffee?" Grateful, Harold accepted. Amira led him to the staff cafeteria and served him a cup of hot coffee and a sandwich. "Thank you, Amira," Harold said, feeling a little better. "You're very kind." Amira smiled. "It's nothing. My grandpa always said we should help those in need." As they talked, Harold shared his story. Amira listened attentively, offering comforting words. "The airport can be a tough place at night," Amira explained. "Be careful around some of the homeless folks who hang out here. Not all of them are friendly." Harold appreciated the warning but didn't have time to ask more. Amira had to get back to work. That night, Harold found a more secluded bench to sleep on, but his rest was interrupted by angry voices. "Hey, old man, this is our spot," yelled a man, flanked by 2 others. Harold stood up, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'm leaving." One of the men shoved him. "We don't want you here. Get lost." Harold stumbled, almost falling. Just then, he heard a commanding voice. "What's going on here?" It was Frank Miller, the airport's head of security. The homeless men backed off immediately. Frank looked at Harold with suspicion. "Who are you? You can't stay here." Harold tried to explain his situation, but Frank didn't seem interested. "I don't care about your story. This is an airport, not a shelter. If you don't have a ticket, you'll have to leave." Harold felt a mix of fear and indignation. "Please, sir, I've got nowhere to go." Frank crossed his arms. "That's not my problem. If I see you here again, I'll call the authorities." As Frank walked away, Harold realized he had to make a decision. He couldn't just accept being thrown out. The airport was his only refuge now. With a determination he hadn't felt in a long time, Harold decided he would talk to airport management. Someone had to listen to him. Tomorrow, he thought, he would find a way to stay. There had to be someone with compassion in this place. With that thought, Harold prepared for another tough night, but with a small spark of hope in his heart. The next morning, Harold woke up early, determined to speak with airport management. As he made his way to the information desk, he saw Frank Miller approaching with 2 security guards. "You again," Frank said, irritated. "I've already told you. You can't stay here. Come on, out." Harold tried to reason with him. "Please, Mr. Miller, I just need to talk to someone from management." Frank signaled to the guards. "Get him out of here." At that moment, Harold noticed a commotion nearby. A group of homeless people were arguing with other security guards, and the situation seemed on the verge of turning violent. Without thinking, Harold stepped between the two groups. "Please, stop. We don't need violence." Everyone was surprised by the old man's intervention. Harold continued, "I know you're all frustrated, but fighting isn't going to solve anything." Frank watched, confused by Harold's actions. The homeless and the guards lowered their defenses, listening. Harold looked around and saw a crowd of passengers gathering. He felt it was time to act. Kneeling in the middle of the terminal, he began to pray out loud. "Lord, I pray for all of us here today, for those who have no home, for those who work hard, for those who are traveling. Give us strength and compassion to understand one another." His voice, firm and sincere, echoed through the terminal. People stopped to listen. "Bless Mr. Frank and his team, who are just doing their jobs. Bless these homeless men and women who need help and understanding, and bless all the passengers and employees of this airport." As Harold prayed, a respectful silence spread throughout the place. Some passengers joined in the prayer, others filmed with their cell phones. Frank was frozen, unsure how to react. In all his years working at the airport, he had never seen anything like it. When Harold finished, he opened his eyes and saw dozens of people around him. Many had tears in their eyes. A woman approached. "Sir, your prayer was beautiful. Is there any way I can help?" Others gathered, offering money, food, and even a place to stay. The homeless people, touched by the prayer, apologized to the security guards. Frank approached Harold, his expression a mix of confusion and respect. "I don't know what to say. I've never seen anything like this." Harold smiled gently. "Sometimes, all we need is to stop and remember our common humanity." In the following minutes, the video of Harold's prayer began to spread on social media. Passengers shared the story of the airport angel who calmed a tense situation with a prayer. Amira, who had witnessed everything, hugged Harold. "You're amazing. Did you see how you touched everyone's heart?" Harold, still surprised by the events, just smiled. "I just did what I thought was right." As the situation calmed down, Frank found himself in a dilemma. He couldn't just kick Harold out now, but he also couldn't ignore the airport's rules. "Look, Mr. Ross," Frank said, hesitating, "I can't promise anything, but I'll speak to my superiors about your situation. For now, you can stay." Harold thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. What no one knew was that, at that exact moment, the video of Harold's prayer had reached the phone of Margaret Chen, the airport's CEO. Margaret watched the video several times, impressed by the scene. She saw the positive comments multiplying and realized the situation needed her personal attention. Determined, she picked up the phone. "Cancel my morning meetings. I'm going to the airport now." Meanwhile, at the terminal, Harold sat on a bench, exhausted but at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days, he felt hopeful. Frank, still processing the events, kept an eye on Harold. Part of him wanted to follow the rules and remove the old man, but another part was deeply moved by what he had witnessed. The passengers who had witnessed the scene continued to approach Harold, offering words of support and small acts of kindness. The atmosphere in the airport had completely changed. Amira, during her break, sat next to Harold. "I knew you were special from the moment I saw you. Now everyone can see it." Harold smiled, grateful for the young woman's friendship. "Thank you, Amira. Your kindness gave me strength during the tough times." As they talked, Neither of them knew that Margaret Chen was on her way, determined to personally understand and resolve the Harold situation. The airport, usually a place of transit, had transformed into a scene of compassion and humanity. And at the center of it all was Harold, a man who, in his darkest hour, had found the strength to light the way for others. Margaret Chen arrived at the airport determined to resolve Harold's situation. She found Frank Miller in the main lobby. "Where is Mr. Ross?" Margaret asked. Frank led her to Harold, who was talking to some passengers. Margaret watched for a moment before approaching. "Mr. Ross? I'm Margaret Chen, CEO of the airport. May we talk?" Harold nodded, surprised. Margaret took him to a private room where they could speak without interruptions. "I saw the video of your prayer," Margaret began. "It was impressive how you managed to calm the situation." Harold smiled humbly. "I just did what I thought was right, ma'am." Margaret got straight to the point. "Mr. Ross, I understand your situation, but we can't have people living at the airport. It's against the rules." Harold took a deep breath. "I understand, Ms. Chen, but maybe I could be of help here." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked, intrigued. "A lot of people pass through here every day. Some are happy, others are sad or scared. Maybe I could help, offer comfort and guidance." Margaret considered the idea. "Are you suggesting some kind of chaplaincy?" "Something like that," Harold replied. "I wouldn't need any payment, just a place to stay. I could try it out if you'd like." Margaret thought for a moment. "All right, Mr. Ross, let's give it a try for a month, but the board won't be happy about this." As soon as they left the room, Margaret faced immediate resistance from Frank and other team members. "We can't allow this," Frank argued. "It goes against all of our policies." Margaret stood firm. "It's a unique situation, Frank. We'll give Mr. Ross a chance." In the following days, Harold began his informal work as the airport's chaplain. He spoke with anxious passengers, comforted those who received bad news, and even mediated conflicts between stressed travelers. A week later, Margaret received a call from the board. "Chen, what's going on over there? We've heard about a homeless man acting as a chaplain. This is unacceptable." Margaret defended her decision. "He's not just any homeless man. Mr. Ross has helped a lot of people. Complaints have gone down and passenger satisfaction has increased." The board wasn't convinced but agreed to wait until the trial period ended. Meanwhile, Harold started an interfaith prayer group. People from different beliefs gathered to share moments of reflection and mutual support. One day, Harold noticed a passenger crying alone. When he approached, he saw she was holding a torn blouse. "Can I help?" Harold asked gently. The woman explained that the blouse was a keepsake from her late mother and had torn during the trip. "I could try to fix it for you," Harold offered. With a needle and thread borrowed from Amira, Harold skillfully sewed the blouse. The passenger was moved by the gesture. "I didn't know you had this talent," Amira said, watching Harold work. Harold smiled. "My wife taught me. I never thought it would be useful here." Word about Harold's sewing skills quickly spread. Soon, he was helping passengers with small clothing repairs in addition to offering spiritual comfort. Frank watched all this with growing resentment. He couldn't understand why Margaret allowed Harold to stay. At the end of the trial month, Margaret called Harold for a meeting. "Mr. Ross, I'm impressed with your work. I'd like to officially offer you the position of honorary chaplain of the airport." Harold was deeply touched. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. This means a lot to me." Margaret smiled. "You know, my parents were immigrants. I understand how important it is to have someone offer comfort in difficult moments." Just then, a man burst into the room. He was an irate passenger. "What is this nonsense?" he shouted. "A homeless man as a chaplain? This is an airport, not a church." Margaret stood up, ready to defend her decision. Harold, on the other hand, remained calm, preparing for yet another challenge in his new journey as the terminal chaplain. The passenger continued his rant, drawing the attention of others in the lobby. Margaret and Harold exchanged glances, knowing that how they handled this situation could determine the future of the chaplaincy program. 6 months had passed since Harold became the honorary chaplain of Chicago Airport. His presence had become an essential part of daily life at the terminal. One busy afternoon, Harold noticed a man shouting at the airline counter. The passenger, visibly upset, was threatening the employee. Harold calmly approached. "Sir, can I help you?" The man turned, furious. "They lost my luggage. I have an important meeting, and I don't have my clothes." Harold listened patiently, allowing the man to vent. Then he suggested, "I understand your frustration. How about we sit down and see what we can do?" Gradually, the man calmed down. Harold helped mediate the situation with the airline, which offered compensation and promised to locate the luggage quickly. "Thank you," the man said, embarrassed. "I don't know what got into me." Harold smiled. Sometimes we all just need someone to listen to us. After the incident, Harold felt a pain in his chest. At first, he ignored it, but Amira noticed his pale face. "Harold, you don't look well," she said, concerned. Reluctantly, Harold agreed to see the airport doctor. The diagnosis wasn't good. He had a heart condition that required treatment. "You need rest," advised the doctor. However, Harold didn't want to leave his work. "I'll take the medicine, doctor, but I need to keep going. A lot of people depend on me." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Los Angeles, Sarah Ross was facing her own challenges. Her marriage was falling apart. She and her husband barely spoke, both too busy with their careers. At work, Sarah was known for her efficiency, but also for her lack of scruples. She prioritized profitable projects, even when ethically questionable. In an important meeting, Sarah presented a proposal for a new real estate venture. "This project will triple our profits," she stated confidently. A colleague raised a hand. "But Sarah, this will displace hundreds of low-income families." Sarah hesitated for a moment, briefly recalling the values her father had tried to teach her, but she quickly pushed those thoughts away. "Business is business," she replied coldly. "We can't miss this opportunity." Her boss smiled in approval, but Sarah noticed the disapproving looks from some colleagues. That night, alone in her luxurious apartment, Sarah found herself thinking about her father. Where was he? How was he living? For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly washed it away with a sip of expensive wine. The next day, Sarah received bad news. An important client had canceled their contract with the company. "They said they don't agree with our business practices," her assistant informed her. Sarah was shocked. It was a harsh blow to her reputation and her chances for promotion. That night, her husband finally confronted her. "Sarah, we can't go on like this. You only care about work and money. What happened to the woman I married?" His words hit her like a slap. Sarah realized she no longer recognized the person she had become. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Harold continued his work at the airport despite his fragile health. He had created a small support group for people who were afraid of flying. "Take a deep breath," he gently advised a young woman who looked anxious. "Remember, you're stronger than your fear." The girl smiled, grateful. Harold felt a wave of satisfaction, even with the pain in his chest. Back in Los Angeles, Sarah was in her office contemplating her situation. Her phone rang. "Sarah Ross? This is Robert from Midwest Developments in Chicago. We have a job offer for you." Sarah was surprised. Chicago, her hometown, the place she had left behind along with her father. "We're looking for someone with your experience to lead a new project," Robert continued. It would be a chance to start fresh. The words "start fresh" echoed in Sarah's mind. She looked at a photo of her father on her desk, one she kept hidden in a drawer. "Can I think about it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course," Robert replied, "but don't take too long. It's a unique opportunity." As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, and a strange sense that fate was offering her a second chance. She picked up the photo of her father, looking at the smiling face of the man she had abandoned. Chicago. Going home. Maybe, Sarah thought, it was time to face her past and make peace with her choices. With trembling hands, Sarah began typing a response email to Robert. Her decision could change everything, and she had no idea just how much. Harold was excited. Today was the official launch of the Hearts in Transit program. Margaret had finally approved the initiative, seeing the positive impact Harold had at the airport. "We are here to offer support to everyone passing through our airport," Harold announced to a small group of volunteers. "Whether it's a kind word, a prayer, or just a listening ear." Despite his enthusiasm, Harold felt the weight of his fragile health. His heart sometimes faltered, reminding him of his limitations. But he persisted, determined to make a difference. Frank watched from a distance, his expression a mix of reluctant admiration and confusion. He couldn't understand how this man, whom he had almost kicked out months ago, was now so respected. Approaching Harold after the meeting, Frank asked, "How do you do it? How do you help so many people?" Harold smiled. "Everyone has a story, Frank. We just need to listen." Something in those words struck Frank. He remembered his own past, the pain that had made him bitter. Without thinking, he began to open up to Harold. "I lost my wife years ago," Frank said, his voice low. "After that, I shut down. I thought being tough was the only way to deal with the pain." Harold listened attentively, offering words of comfort. For the first time in years, Frank felt a weight lift off his shoulders. In the following days, Frank quietly began helping Harold. He made it easier for Hearts in Transit to access restricted areas, ensuring they could reach more people. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Sarah was facing the harsh reality of her failed marriage. Sitting in front of her lawyer, she signed the divorce papers. "Is this really what you want, Sarah?" her husband asked, a mixture of sadness and resignation in his voice. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I don't think either of us has been happy for a long time, Tom." Leaving the lawyer's office, Sarah felt strangely empty. Her marriage, her career, everything she had fought for now seemed meaningless. Back at the Chicago airport, Amira received surprising news. Thanks to Harold's recommendations, she was being promoted to service manager. "I can't believe it, Harold," Amira exclaimed, hugging him. "I owe all of this to you." Harold smiled, proud. "You deserve it, Amira. Your hard work and compassion didn't go unnoticed." The Hearts in Transit program was growing rapidly. Harold and his volunteers now offered support in various areas of the airport. They comforted passengers afraid of flying, helped families reunited after long separations, and even mediated conflicts between stressed travelers. One day, Harold found a young woman crying in a secluded corner. Gently approaching her, he asked if he could help. "My father," she sobbed. "He's dying, and I didn't get there in time to say goodbye." Harold sat beside her, offering comfort and a prayer. The young woman, touched by his kindness, hugged Harold before leaving. Frank, who had been watching the scene, felt something shift inside him. He began to see the airport not just as a place of work, but as a place where lives were touched daily. In Los Angeles, Sarah looked at the job offer from Chicago. The idea of returning to her hometown both scared and attracted her at the same time. Her apartment, once a symbol of success, now felt cold and impersonal. The professional achievements, the material possessions, none of it filled the emptiness she felt. Picking up her phone, Sarah called Robert from Midwest Developments. "Hello, Robert. It's Sarah Ross. I accept the offer." As she hung up, Sarah felt a mix of fear and hope. Chicago, a new beginning. Maybe there she could find what was missing in her life. What Sarah didn't know was that her father, the man she had abandoned years ago, was closer than she imagined. Back at the airport, Harold felt tired after a long day. His heart ached, reminding him of his fragile condition. But seeing the grateful faces of the people he had helped, he knew that every moment was worth it. Frank approached Harold at the end of the day. "Ross, I wanted to thank you. You've changed this place. You've changed all of us." Harold smiled, touched by Frank's acknowledgement. "Thank you, Frank. We're all in this together." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the airport, Harold reflected on his journey. From a homeless and desperate man, he had become a source of hope for so many. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, his daughter Sarah was packing her bags, preparing to return to the city where it all began, unaware of the reunion destiny was about to bring. Sarah arrived at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, dragging her suitcase behind her. She looked around, feeling a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. This was her new beginning, a chance to rebuild her life away from the failures of Los Angeles. As she walked through the terminal, something caught her attention. An older man with his back to her was comforting a woman in tears. There was something familiar about him, the way he moved, the way he tilted his head to listen. Sarah stopped, her heart racing. It couldn't be. The man turned around, and she saw his face. It was Harold, her father. Shocked, Sarah ducked behind a column. How was he here? Why was he at the airport? 1,000 questions flooded her mind. Watching from a distance, Sarah saw Harold move through the terminal. He greeted the staff by name, helped lost passengers, and even sewed a loose button for a hurried businessman. Sarah couldn't believe it. Her father, the man she had abandoned years ago, seemed to be an integral part of this airport. People treated him with respect and affection. As she watched, a young employee approached Harold. Sarah heard him call her Amira. They spoke like old friends. Deciding to step forward, Sarah took a breath and moved. Amira saw her first, and her expression changed. "Wait, I know you," Amira said, frowning. She looked from Sarah to Harold, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You're his daughter, aren't you? The one from the picture?" Harold turned, his eyes meeting Sarah's. The shock on his face was unmistakable. "Sarah?" he whispered, barely believing it. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Dad, Amira stepped forward, protective. "Do you have any idea what you did to him?" "Amira, please," Harold intervened gently. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with both love and hurt. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" Sarah swallowed hard. I got a job here in Chicago. Dad, I didn't know you were here. You thought what?" Harold's voice was calm but full of emotion. "That I had just disappeared after you left me at this airport years ago?" Guilt washed over Sarah like a wave. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was selfish. Harold raised his hand, stopping her. "Sarah, a lot has happened. I've built a life here, helping people. Something you clearly forgot how to do." The words hit Sarah hard. She realized how much she had changed, how far she had strayed from the values her father had always tried to teach her. "You're right," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I lost my way. My marriage is over. My career is in ruins. I came to Chicago to start over, but I never imagined. Harold watched her, his face a mix of compassion and caution. Sarah, Suddenly, Harold stopped speaking. His hand went to his chest and he staggered. Harold! Amira screamed, rushing to support him. In a panic, Sarah ran over. Dad, what's happening? His heart, Amira explained quickly. He has heart problems. We need help. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. Harold was placed on a stretcher, still conscious but clearly in pain. As they took him away, he looked at Sarah. Stay, he said weakly. Please, stay this time. Sarah nodded, tears now flowing freely. She watched helplessly as her father was rushed to the hospital. Amira turned to Sarah, her face a mix of worry and accusation. He dedicated his life to helping others after you left him, and now Sarah felt the full weight of her past actions. Her father had built a meaningful life from nothing, while she had squandered every opportunity she had. As the ambulance drove away, sirens blaring, Sarah found herself standing alone in the middle of the airport, confronting the consequences of her choices. She knew she had a lot to make up for, a lot to learn. With determination, Sarah followed the path to the hospital. It was time to face her past and maybe, just maybe, find a way to redemption. Sarah spent the night at the hospital, keeping vigil over her father. When Harold finally woke up, his first question was about hearts in transit. Don't worry, Sarah said hesitantly. I can take care of it while you recover. Harold looked at her, surprised. You would do that? Sarah nodded, unsure how she would keep this promise. At the airport, Sarah faced suspicious glances from the staff. Amira watched her closely, clearly skeptical. Look, Sarah began. I know you don't trust me, but my dad needs help, and I want to do this for him. Reluctantly, the team agreed to let her take over temporarily. Sarah quickly found herself overwhelmed. Passengers were seeking comfort, and staff were asking for advice. She had no idea how to handle it all. How does my dad do this? She murmured to herself. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Tommy, Sarah's 12-year-old son, was facing his own problems. Tired of the constant fights with his dad and missing his mom, he made a drastic decision. With some savings and his dad's credit card, Tommy bought a ticket to Chicago. Determined to find his mom, he boarded the flight alone. Back in Chicago, Sarah began to understand the impact of her father's work. She saw tears turn into smiles, conflicts resolved with kind words. Your dad has a special gift, Frank said, surprising Sarah with his kindness. He sees the best in people, even when they don't see it in themselves. Sarah felt a pang of regret. He's always been like that. I'm the one who stopped seeing it. Meanwhile, Tommy arrived at Chicago's airport. Scared but determined, he wandered through the corridors, looking for any sign of his mother. At the hospital, Harold insisted on hearing about the show. Sarah reassured him, hiding her own struggles. Everything's under control, Dad. Just rest. Back at the airport, Sarah received a disturbing call from her ex-husband. Sarah, Tommy's gone. I think he went to you. Panic overtook Sarah. Her son, alone in Chicago? Immediately, she mobilized the Hearts in Transit team. Frank contacted airport security. Amira coordinated the volunteers for the search. We have to find him, Sarah said, her voice trembling. He's only 12. The news spread quickly. Staff and even passengers joined the search. Sarah was surprised by everyone's solidarity. Hours passed, with no success. Sarah felt the weight of guilt. If she had been a better mother, this wouldn't be happening. Then, alarming news came in. A boy matching Tommy's description was seen entering a restricted and dangerous area of the airport. "He must be scared and confused," Amira said. "We need to act fast." Desperate, Sarah ran toward the area, ignoring security warnings. Her son was in danger, and she wouldn't fail him again. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Harold sensed something was wrong. Against medical orders and ignoring the pain in his chest, he got dressed. "I need to get back to the airport," he told the surprised nurse. "My family needs me." Back at the airport, the search intensified. Guided by Amira and Frank, Sarah approached the restricted area. "Tommy," she called. "Tommy, it's Mom. Where are you?" A small noise caught her attention. Sarah saw movement in the shadows. "Tommy," she called softly. Slowly, a small figure emerged. It was Tommy, scared, and with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. Sarah ran to him, hugging him tightly. "Oh, Tommy, thank God you're safe." At that moment, Harold arrived at the airport, breathless and pale. He saw Sarah hugging a boy, surrounded by the Hearts in Transit team. "Sarah?" he called, his voice weak. Sarah turned, shocked to see her father there. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Harold took a step forward but stumbled. Frank quickly caught him. I knew you needed me," Harold said before collapsing into Frank's arms. Chaos ensued. Paramedics were called again. Sarah, torn between her newly found son and her unconscious father, felt the weight of years of wrong choices. As Harold was placed on a stretcher, Tommy looked at Sarah, confused. "Mom? Who is that man?" With tears in her eyes, Sarah replied, "That's your grandfather, Tommy. And we almost lost him. Twice." As the ambulance drove away, Sarah held Tommy's hand, watching the Hearts in Transit team spring into action once again. She realized she was in the middle of something much bigger than she had imagined. It was time to make peace with her past, and perhaps build a better future for all of them. The Chicago airport was on high alert. Against all medical advice, Harold insisted on joining the search for his grandson, Tommy. "Dad, you need to rest," Sarah pleaded, worried about Harold's pale complexion. Harold shook his head, determined. "He's my grandson, Sarah. I can't just sit still." The Hearts in Transit team spread out across the airport. Frank coordinated with security, while Amira organized the volunteers. Sarah, her heart heavy, led a group. "Tommy," she called, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. Harold, supported by 2 volunteers, searched another area. Every step was a struggle, but he refused to give up. Hours passed with no success. The tension grew with each minute. Sarah began to imagine the worst scenarios. "What if he left the airport?" she asked, panic evident in her voice. Frank tried to calm her. "We've got people monitoring all exits. He's here somewhere." Suddenly, a shout came over the radio. "We've spotted the boy. Cargo area, Sector 7. Everyone rushed to the location. When they arrived, they saw Tommy precariously balanced on a tall stack of boxes. "Tommy!" Sarah screamed in horror. "Stay still, sweetheart. We're coming to get you." The boy, frightened, looked down. "Mom? I'm scared." Harold, gasping for breath, arrived at the scene. Seeing his grandson in danger, he felt a surge of strength. "Tommy," Harold called, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm your grandpa. Everything's going to be okay, kid. Trust us." Tommy, confused, looked at the elderly man below. Something in Harold's voice calmed him. The rescue team arrived, but the stack of boxes was unstable. Any sudden movement could cause a collapse. Harold stepped forward. "Let me go. I'm lighter and can climb up carefully." "Dad, no," Sarah protested. "It's too dangerous." But Harold was already moving. With surprising agility for his age, he began to climb the stack of boxes. The entire airport seemed to hold its breath. Sarah watched, her heart pounding as her father got closer to Tommy. "Hey, champ," Harold said softly, now just a few feet from Tommy. "How about giving your old grandpa a hug?" Tommy, with tears in his eyes, reached out. Harold grabbed him and pulled him into a tight embrace. At that moment, the boxes began to shift. Harold, holding Tommy tightly, lost his balance. "Dad!" Sarah screamed, running toward them. For one terrifying instant, it seemed they would both fall. But then, Frank and another security guard appeared, catching Harold and Tommy. When everyone was safely on the ground, Sarah hugged her son and father, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mom," Tommy sobbed. "I just wanted to see you." Sarah kissed her son's forehead. "It's okay now, sweetheart. We're all together." Harold, exhausted but happy, smiled at his grandson. "Welcome to the family, Tommy." At that moment, camera flashes started going off. Reporters, alerted to the drama at the airport, captured the emotional scene. "Sir," a reporter called, approaching Harold, "you're the famous airport chaplain, aren't you? Can you tell us what happened here?" Harold, surprised by the attention, looked at Sarah and Tommy. "Just a family being reunited," he said simply. But the story was too big to ignore. In the days that followed, Harold's saga, the man who was abandoned at the airport and became a beloved figure, now reunited with his daughter and grandson, captured national attention. Interview requests poured in. TV shows wanted to tell his story. Hearts in Transit was suddenly in the spotlight. Sarah, watching all this unfold, felt a deep transformation within herself. She saw the impact her father had on people, the love and respect he inspired. "Dad," she said one evening, as the three generations sat together in Harold's hospital room, "I'm sorry for everything. You've built something amazing here." Harold smiled, holding both Sarah and Tommy's hands. "The important thing is that we're together now." Tommy, still processing everything, looked at his grandfather with admiration. "Grandpa, you're a hero." Harold chuckled softly. "No, Tommy, just a man trying to do the right thing." As the family talked and laughed, catching up on lost time, Harold's phone rang. It was Margaret Chen, the airport's CEO. "Harold," she said, her voice excited, "you won't believe the opportunity that's come up. A national network wants to do a documentary about Hearts in Transit. They want to expand the program to other airports." Harold looked at Sarah and Tommy, his heart full of love and gratitude. He knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. "Margaret," he replied, "I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us." In the weeks following Tommy's dramatic rescue, O'Hare Airport became the focus of national attention. TV crews filled the halls, eager to capture the story of the airport chaplain and his program, Hearts in Transit. Harold, still recovering, faced a flood of interviews. "I never imagined any of this," he said repeatedly, his humility evident. "I just wanted to help people." Sarah, now fully involved in the program, was also frequently interviewed. "My dad taught me the true meaning of compassion," she admitted, the pride clear in her voice. Frank, once skeptical, was now one of the program's biggest supporters. "Hearts in Transit has transformed this airport," he declared to reporters. "It's transformed all of us." Harold's story sparked a national debate about the role of support programs in public spaces. Experts discussed it on TV, some praising the initiative, others questioning its practicality. "Is it an appropriate use of airport resources?" critics asked. "How can we not support something that helps so many people?" argued the supporters. Amid all the attention, Sarah faced her own challenges. Her ex-husband arrived in Chicago, determined to take Tommy back. "He's my son too," her ex insisted. "You can't just keep him here." Sarah, strengthened by her new perspective on life, stood her ground. "Tommy is happy here. He finally met his grandfather. I'm not going to take that away from him." The dispute threatened to turn into a legal battle, adding tension to an already hectic environment. Despite the controversies, support for Hearts in Transit grew. Letters and emails arrived daily, with people sharing how the program had helped them. Margaret Chen, seeing the positive impact, decided to organize a ceremony to honor Harold. The airport's main hall was decorated, and hundreds of people gathered for the event. Harold, dressed in his best suit, seemed uncomfortable with all the attention. Sarah, by his side, held his hand in support. Margaret took the stage. "Harold Ross has shown us the power of compassion," she began. "He has turned this airport into a place of hope and healing." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Harold, with tears in his eyes, waved in gratitude. Then, Margaret made a surprising announcement. "We're considering expanding Hearts in Transit to airports across the country. Harold, we'd like you to lead this expansion." A murmur of excitement ran through the crowd. Harold, caught off guard, looked at Sarah, uncertain. After the ceremony, in a private room, Margaret revealed more news. "I'm planning to retire soon," she told Harold and Sarah. "And I'm considering you, Sarah, as my possible successor." Sarah was stunned. "Me? But I just got here." Margaret smiled. "You have a unique perspective. You know the corporate world, but you also understand the heart of this program. Think about it." Harold, silent until then, finally spoke. "It's an incredible opportunity for both of us. But leaving this airport..." His voice faltered. Sarah, seeing her father's distress, hugged him. "We don't have to decide anything now, Dad. We have time." That night, after Tommy went to bed, Harold and Sarah talked at length. "I never thought my life would take this turn," Harold said, looking out the window of the hotel room where they were temporarily staying. Sarah nodded. "Neither did I, Dad. But I'm grateful we're here, together." Harold turned to her, his eyes serious. "Sarah, if I accept leading the national expansion, I'll need to travel a lot. I'm not sure my health can handle it." Sarah took her father's hand. Maybe I can help. If I take Margaret's offer, I can oversee things here while you travel." Harold smiled, proud of his daughter's transformation. "You've really changed, Sarah." "Thanks to you, Dad," she replied, tears in her eyes. As father and daughter discussed their options, they knew that any decision would drastically change their lives. Hearts in Transit had begun as a small act of kindness in a moment of despair. Now it was about to become something much bigger. Harold looked out the window, seeing the distant lights of the airport. He had built a life there, found a purpose. Leaving it all behind would be hard. 3 months after the tribute ceremony, Harold, Sarah, and Tommy boarded a flight to Europe. It was the fulfillment of a long-postponed dream for Harold. "I never thought I'd actually take this trip," Harold said, gazing out the airplane window. Sarah smiled, holding her father's hand. "You deserve this, Dad." Their first stop was Rome. Harold was in awe of St. Peter's Basilica. "So much history, so much faith," he murmured, deeply moved. Tommy, initially bored with the churches, began to take an interest in the stories his grandfather shared. "Grandpa, how do you know so much about these places?" Harold smiled. "I spent years dreaming of this trip, Tommy. I read everything I could." As they traveled through Europe, visiting Paris, London, and Amsterdam, Sarah noticed her father tiring more easily. She watched him with concern. remembering the doctor's warnings about his fragile health. In Prague, Harold had a moment of weakness. Sarah found him sitting on a bench, breathless. "Dad, maybe we should go home," she suggested, worried. Harold shook his head. "No, Sarah. I'm living my dream. I'm not giving up now." During their travels, Sarah frequently received calls from Margaret about the Hearts in Transit program. The national expansion was progressing, and the pressure for Sarah to take the lead was growing. "I don't know if I can do this, Dad," Sarah confessed one night in Vienna. "What if I'm not good enough?" Harold hugged her. "You've grown so much, Sarah. Trust yourself as I trust you." In Athens, their final stop, the family faced a crisis. Tommy, fascinated by ancient history, got lost in the Acropolis. Harold, ignoring his fatigue, led the search. "We have to find him," he insisted, his voice weak but determined. Sarah, panicked, ran back and forth. Tommy, where are you?" After hours of anxiety, they found Tommy sitting calmly in an ancient temple gazing at the horizon. "Sorry," the boy said, embarrassed. "I just wanted to see the sunset from here. It's beautiful." Harold, exhausted but relieved, hugged his grandson. "Sometimes, Tommy, we need to get lost to find ourselves." That night at the hotel, Harold had an idea. "I think I'm going to write a book," he announced, "about hearts in transit, about our family, to inspire others." Sarah looked at him surprised. "Dad, that's wonderful." On their flight back to Chicago, the family reflected on everything they had experienced. "You know, Dad," Sarah said, "I think I'm ready to take the lead on the program." Harold smiled, proud. "I knew you'd find your way, Sarah." Tommy, who had grown a lot during the trip, added, "Can I help too? I want to be like you and Grandpa." When they arrived at O'Hare Airport, they were greeted by a welcoming crowd. Frank, Amira, and the Hearts in Transit team were there, eager for news. "Welcome back," exclaimed Amira, hugging Harold. Margaret approached Sarah. "So, have you made your decision?" Sarah looked at her father and son, then at the team waiting. "Yes," she replied confidently. "I'm ready to lead the national expansion." In the months that followed, Hearts in Transit grew beyond expectations. Sarah traveled the country, setting up programs in other airports, while Harold, though physically limited, remained the heart and soul of the original program in Chicago. Tommy, inspired by his grandfather, started a youth volunteer club at the airport involving kids in the mission of helping others. A year after their trip to Europe, Harold published his book, Hearts in Transit, A Journey of Faith and Redemption. It became a bestseller, inspiring people across the country. One quiet afternoon, Harold sat on his favorite bench at the airport, watching the travelers come and go. Sarah joined him, tired but satisfied after a long meeting. "You know, Dad," she said, "I never imagined I'd find my purpose here, in the same place I once abandoned you." Harold took his daughter's hand. "Life takes us on mysterious paths, Sarah. The important thing is where we end up." They watched as Tommy approached, leading a group of young volunteers. The boy waved, smiling. "Look at him," Harold said proudly. "The future of Hearts in Transit." After Harold's book launch, the Ross family found themselves at the center of a new wave of attention. Invitations for lectures and TV shows came in daily. Though tired, Harold accepted a few, seeing each opportunity as a chance to spread the message of Hearts in Transit. One night, after a particularly moving speech, a young woman approached Harold. "Your book saved my life," she said, tears in her eyes. "I was about to give up, but your words gave me hope." Moments like this reaffirmed for Harold that his journey, with all its challenges, had been worth it. Sarah, meanwhile, faced new challenges as she expanded the program. Not all airports were open to the idea. On a trip to Dallas, she met strong resistance from the local administration. "This won't work here," insisted the airport director. "We don't have the resources for this kind of program." Sarah, channeling the patience and wisdom she had learned from her father, replied, "Let me show you how it works. Give us a week." With the help of local volunteers, Sarah set up a pilot program. By the end of the week, the impact was undeniable. Stressed passengers found comfort, conflicts were peacefully resolved, and the overall atmosphere of the airport had improved. The director, impressed, gave the green light for the permanent program. "You proved me wrong," he admitted. "This is exactly what we needed." Tommy, now 13, continued to grow in his role in the program. He came up with the idea to create a children's corner at the airport, a space where kids in transit could relax and play. "Traveling can be scary for kids," Tommy explained to Sarah and Harold. "I want them to have a safe and fun place." The project was an immediate success, attracting praise from grateful parents and even international media attention. At home, the family dynamic continued to evolve. Sarah's ex-husband, seeing the positive impact the program had on Tommy, finally relented in the custody battle. "He belongs to this," he told Sarah. "I've never seen him so happy and motivated." One afternoon, while Harold rested at home, he received an unexpected visit. It was Frank, the former head of security who once tried to kick him out of the airport. "Harold," Frank began, visibly emotional, "I came to say thank you. Hearts in Transit didn't just change the airport, it changed my life. It made me believe in kindness again." Harold, touched, hugged his friend. "Frank, you always had kindness in you. You just needed a chance to show it." As the program grew, Sarah realized she needed help managing everything. She decided to form a leadership team, bringing Amira and Frank into key roles. "You've been here from the beginning," Sarah said during the team meeting. "No one understands the heart of this program better than you." With the new structure in place, Hearts in Transit became more than just an airport program. It became a movement, inspiring similar initiatives in hospitals, train stations, and other public spaces. Harold, watching it all unfold, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His dream had not only come true, but had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. One evening, sitting on his favorite bench at the airport with Sarah and Tommy, Harold reflected on his journey. "You know," he said, watching the travelers pass by, "when I was abandoned here years ago, I thought my life was over. But really, it was just beginning." Sarah squeezed her father's hand, tears in her eyes. "You taught us it's never too late for a new beginning, Dad." Tommy, hugging his grandfather, added, "And that family is more than blood. It's about who we choose to love and help." As the sun set over the airport, bathing the terminal in a golden glow, the three generations of the Ross family embraced, grateful for the path that brought them there and hopeful for the future ahead. O'Hare Airport, once just a place of departure and arrival, had become the heart of a compassion revolution, a living testament to the power of love, faith, and second chances. And at the center of it all was a family that had learned that the true Hearts in Transit are those open to the journey of unconditional love. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or suggestions, and of course, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all of our emotional stories. After all, every second can change the course of a life, and the next one could be yours.